Yeah, hello. It's been a while. I'm sorry, but here I am with the usual suspects: DAZ, Cinema, no Unreal yet. Who knows what the future will hold? But for this one, we're breaking down the creation of my most recent personal piece, which you can find in its entirety on my Patreon. That's an 11-hour process video, including commentary and including its respective project files for both Cinema 4D and Photoshop. So if that's something you're interested in, go check that out. Why don't we start where we always start with artwork like these? We start off in DAZ, as always, with the trusty old Genesis 8 female for this project. I'm not using a newer model because that's just right. We send that off to ZBRUSH using the Go Z feature, so we can sculpt some additional morphs that we can then bring back into DAZ and apply to our current Genesis 8 female. I did one for the hips, and then I brought it into DAZ, modified the character again, and then brought it into ZBrush one more time to modify the neck because I didn't want it to be as thick. And with that, we are through with ZBrush for the character, and we then just move on to basic DAZ stuff, posing, and getting the character set up as to how we would like it to be in the final output. I then export the T-poses and the regular poses, including the animation cache, which we can then bring into Marvelous Designer for additional sculpting, which you can see me do right here. We will get a tank top done and some pants inside Marvelous. It's a bit fiddling around and just trying what looks cool. I wasn't trying to get a real proper realistic pant output. That's why all the seams and the pockets and stuff are just ludicrously placed and done. It's super sloppy because I knew I wanted to get a cartoonish result that I will then overpaint at the end anyways. So you can see me just do some belt loops and all that stuff and then prepare that mesh for exporting, including the top stitching, which you can export either as a texture or as separate geometry. In my case, I wanted it to be separate geometry. And here you can see me just properly align the UVs and export everything that I need. Export the version with the top stitching and without, so I can then bring it back into ZBrush if needed to. From there on out, I'm going into Substance to basically just do some real sloppy basic job of texturing the pants and the tank top. I was going for a jeans look initially, but considering my expertise in in Substance isn't that proficient, the result ended somewhat wasted. I think I could have done all that inside Cinema as well without having to bring that into Substance Painter, at least for the pants, but we did do some texture work that looked quite nicely, and I'm glad I did it. I then did the same with the tank top. I prepared like a graphic print that I put on it, and then I did the same basic low-level detailing I did with the pant. Just some extra brushes and smudges here and there to get a bit of color variation into the old worn tank top. I didn't want it to be really dirty, but just a bit of like awareness to it. And I wasn't even sure what the final colorway would be, but I thought that this looked pretty nice, so that's what I went for initially. I went back into DAZ so I can export the proper model once again with a higher subdivision count, and then as always, you prepare your materials, the tedious work of just combining and reskinning or reapplying all these DAZ materials. Make sure that the initial scene setup works well, trying to get a feel for what I want in terms of camera's perspective or pose. Here I'm just fixing some UV and bump issues. I then sketched, I guess you could say that, some really bad details and lines inside Photoshop because I knew I wanted to get like these really goofy ass assets that I can then use as accessories in the whole piece. So I'm just using like simple shapes and just drawing whatever the fuck I want. We can then bring that into Illustrator, create a path, and bring that into Cinema to get geometry out of it, and then bring that into ZBrush so I can sculpt some additional geometry on top of it so that we can actually use them as assets inside our project. I wanted to get like some pins and some badges and whatever I could come up with at the moment, where I knew I just wanted to place a lot of stuff in there, but I didn't really care for it to be super beautiful or high resolution because they don't need to be. They just need to be there. So you get the, wouldn't call it illusion, but just so you have a lot of assets to pick from and do whatever you want with them. I then brought them into Substance, as you can see, just to draw on them with some really horrible UV mapping. I mean, they're the same front and back, so I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. But that's what I did because I knew it was fit for the job and way more than enough for this use case. Just drawing some additional details, getting a feel for what I want. The colors aren't really final either in my head, but they ended up being pretty much what they are on screen. I then brought them into Cinema, applied the basic material that I exported and did some really rough basic bump and height mapping, bump and normal mapping. Separated all of them because I figured that's the fastest way to do it in one swoop, and just separate them after the fact inside C4D so I get all of them separate. And then we start building out our scene. What I'm doing right here is trying to create like a belt loop so I can tie some of these stars onto the pants. Not acting like a belt, but basically looking like a belt accessory that just fits in these pant loops. Yeah, I'm just drawing a spline and then I'm cloning the stars. I did that once and then I'm doing it again for the stars to be above. There we go, that's our second star layer where I'm just making sure that the second spline is a bit offset from the first one, and then offset the cloning as well. And that's what you can basically see me do throughout the whole scene. I'm just doing whatever I want with these assets. In this case, I brought them into Cinema 23 so I can inflate them with the soft body dynamics and then get some additional assets that I can then reuse for my scene. I always wanted from the beginning that she should have wings, and these look pretty good. I liked how cartoony they were, and then we're just off to blocking out the scene. So I wanted her to be on this kind of, I wouldn't call it pedestal, but I wanted to separate the motif from the background. And initially I wanted a really simple background, but I opted for this thing because I liked the feel of it. I brought the pants back into ZBRUSH because I didn't like the way they looked at me. I liked them initially, but they were too plain. And I'm just adding some real basic wrinkles to it, so I can then bring some more shape language back into the artwork that was missing before. I just couldn't put my finger on it, but at one point it clicked and I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I struggled with re-importing that into ZBRUSH because UVs and subdivisions and all that stuff is kind of weird. Now I messed up the UVs entirely, but then fixed it again, brought the pants back into ZBRUSH, and now you can see me start block out this creature that she's holding. So I did that in Cinema 4D instead of ZBRUSH initially because I didn't really know what I wanted until I saw it, and now I'm just combining some basic shapes to create the mouth opening for that said creature using the volume measure, and then just basically fitting that, force-fitting that into the blockout that I created earlier. Now I'm blocking out a hand, which I can then just duplicate using symmetry and place that as well. And by doing that, I knew I could have like a okayish blockout that I could then bring into ZBRUSH and model it further. So yeah, I'm just getting a feel for what I want, placing these things however I like. And there we go, using the volume measure to get like decent geometry, and then bring that into ZBRUSH and do the legwork of that entire disgusting ass creature. I knew I wanted it to be like disgusting, but I also wanted it to be a bit goofy and not as evil, so I made sure to kind of balance that as well as I could in the moment, using the standard brush and the clay buildup and a lot of smoothing to just bring shape to it. And then I was like, at first I wanted a tongue, but then I realized I think teeth would be better. So I added some horns. And then I knew, okay, let's go. Let's add some teeth to that thing, which you are going to see me do now. Just using like the basic monster, I think it's monster teeth pack, and just place all these teeths in a manner that doesn't look as clean. It did want it to be chaotic, and I think it worked out quite nicely. At the end of the session, I merged the teeth together, lowered the geometry, as well as I did the same for the horns, brought it back into Cinema 4D. Now I'm just trying around. I initially painted the texture and substance, but then I was like, nah, I can just do that in Cinema. Scrapped doing that and did the texturing inside Cinema for the creature. And now it's on to the eyes. I knew I didn't want to use an actual eye model because I wanted to draw over it. And this is basically the last leg of whatever you're trying to do. So you're trying to get like these 20% that are missing. And in my case, it was the top and the pant colors. As soon as I saw that green on the pants, I knew, oh damn, that shit is sick. And then I started building out the scene some more using the assets that I've previously inflated by using symmetry and just dragging them around, placing them wherever I wanted them to be. And at that point I was like, yeah, that's great, because the border that is now surrounding her kind of looks like a heart, and I can just build on top of that. I didn't want that to read as a heart initially, and it doesn't at the end, but I kind of like the way it was framing out to be. But as always, you're just messing around. Now I'm adding lighting, adding some more of the stuff that I've previously imported into Cinema, and just filling out the scene with as many details as I can without being too bothersome in terms of overfilling the screen, I guess. Now I'm just adjusting the expression and the way and the direction she's looking at, replacing the assets that I've just modified from DAZ, which is an easy thing to do, thankfully, because we're not doing animation work. And then it's on to Photoshop. So I brought all my passes that I exported into Photoshop, named them accordingly, and then I tried to be as clean as possible with the stuff that I'm doing in terms of layering and naming. And yeah, that's like the last 30 to 40% of the piece that makes it really stand out, because if I were to just edit the colors and call it a day, then it wouldn't really look good from an initial render standpoint. At least I don't think it would have, because I knew what I wanted to do with it. That's why I'm just messing around with all these layers. I've exported all the light passes, and then you can see me mess around with gradient maps by just masking out certain things. And then it's on to using a lot of textures, overpainting, and manual brush strokes. There's like a placeholder for hair that I've added, so I knew what I wanted to do with it, because the initial hairstyle was a bit boring, but I didn't want to go too anime with it. And yeah, so it's just me painting some additional detail, erasing and removing it to get a bit more of a painterly feel, I guess. More rim lighting to the pants and to the skin from the left and the right side, so you can make the silhouette pop, which I end up doing by actually adding some dissolve brush behind her, acting as like a yellow glow. But that's basically it. So from a finished render perspective, you get a piece that's cool, but if you take your time and add like these additional hours into Photoshop, you'll get something that's even better. I changed the color of the creature from pink to orange because it kind of looked like a ball sack, which I did not realize because I was tunneling so hard, but thankfully my brother Tim9min, amazing designer, pointed that out. And that's what we have at the end of this session. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry for the infrequent uploads. Japan has been great to me, and ever since coming back I'm swamped with client work, barely having any time with myself, and then just struggling mentally from an art perspective. So it's all these things coming together. But thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far, I truly appreciate it. Check the links in the description and the top comment. I'll see you guys next time, whenever that may be, maybe in a week, maybe in 12 years.